Do you feel the need to help your students with pronunciation but don't know how? Are you in doubt about whether you should correct your students' pronunciation or not, or when to do it? I'm Rubens Heredia, one of your Pavilion ELT vloggers, and in this series of videos we're looking at different ways in which we can make our lessons more engaging, effective, and fun. And in this video, I want to share with you ideas to help your students improve their pronunciation. Want to know how? So come with me. For some of my Cambridge CELTA trainees, there's a little bit of panic when they first start dealing with pronunciation and phonology. There are lots of specific words and terminology that they never came across before. The phonemic chart and the phonemic symbols can seem completely undecipherable at first. And in my lesson observations, I always notice that teachers often shy away from both teaching and correcting pronunciation. However, many of our students value pronunciation, and helping them pronounce things more clearly and fluently will probably help them achieve their learning objectives more quickly. My fellow Pavilion ELT vloggers, Rubens Heredia, made a very interesting video a few months ago with tips to better understand your students' pronunciation needs. Make sure you check it out. And let's cut to the chase. Tip number 1, don't obsess with every individual sound. Most of the pronunciation activities you come across in teaching materials focus on individual sounds like consonants and vowels, and there's good reason for it. It is logical to assume that in order to be understood, we need to produce every little sound correctly. Many of our students come to us with that belief, and they also frequently assume that there is one and only one right way to pronounce sounds. However, reality is not that clear-cut. Different speakers produce what they perceive as the same sound differently. There are so many different English dialects and so many accents influenced by various languages other than English that saying that only one is valid sounds pointless, really. We refer to the context in which English is used as a means to communicate by people who speak other languages as English as a lingua franca. According to Robert Walker, the goal for pronunciation teaching is international intelligibility rather than proximity to a native speaker accent. We also briefly saw that intelligibility in ELF is usually achieved when speakers are competent in the pronunciation features described in the lingua franca core, LFC. Research has shown that some variations affect intelligibility more than others. Problems with the length of a vowel, let's say regarding the difference between sheep and ship, affect intelligibility more than the quality of the vowel, such as in the difference between man and man. Also, consonants generally affect intelligibility more than vowels. But there are two exceptions. Do you want to guess what they are? Yes. The consonant sounds usually represented by th, such as in this or think, are the ones that least affect intelligibility. I find it ironic that the consonants that, according to research, affect intelligibility the least are teachers' and coursebooks' biggest obsession. Tip number 2, help students hear and say weak forms. When we think about pronunciation, many of us tend to focus on the sounds that students are making when they speak. However, English pronunciation affects students not only when they are trying to produce English, but also when they are trying to process what they hear. Vowel reduction, the way that the letter A represents the sound rather than A in about, for example, is one of the factors that most affect understanding. According to Mark Hancock, it seems to me that vowel reduction to schwa may be viewed as optional in some ways. Vowel reduction is mainly to help the speaker, making words easier to say. It doesn't do much to help the listener. That's not what it's for. If your learner's goal is to be understood, failing to use the schwa is probably not important. What is important, however, is being able to recognize such words while listening. In spoken word recognition, the schwa is definitely not optional. Helping your students produce the weak forms can help them sound more natural and fluent, and it may also boost their confidence if their objective is to sound more like the English language models they see in mainstream media, for example. Most importantly, though, being aware of that feature of pronunciation can definitely help your students understand things better. Tip number 3, become more aware of your own pronunciation. Off the top of your head, what happens to your tongue when you pronounce the sound in road? Does it touch your teeth? Does it touch the roof of your mouth? Where does the air go through? Depending on how you have learned the English language, you might never have asked yourself those questions. A lot of what we learn when it comes to pronunciation is unconscious, especially when it's our first language. But if we don't know how we pronounce a sound or a word, how can we teach it? According to Adrian Underhill, it may shock you if I say that I do not meet many teachers who know what they're doing in their mouths when they speak. They seem to apply regardless of whether the teacher has English as a first, second, or third language. And more interestingly, it may be regardless of how much they've read on the topic. In my view, we confuse two kinds of knowing about pronunciation. Knowing about, cognitive reading, being informed, and knowing, physical, kinesthetics, sensing the movements in the mouth, lungs, breath, etc. It is the second kind of knowing that helps you to change your own pronunciation and to help others do the same. I completely agree with Underhill that the combination of formal knowledge about the theory behind phonology and the awareness of what your body is doing go hand in hand. If you need more information on the theory, Underhill himself wrote a fantastic book called Sound Foundations, where he explains concepts in a very clear manner and includes helpful exercises for you to develop awareness of pronunciation. Tip number 4, help students feel and see pronunciation. Now that you know what's happening to your body when you make a sound or say a word, it's time to help your students do the same, which is not really that simple. According to Jonathan Marks, pronunciation relies on physiological habits, which after an early age are less adaptable than the mental faculties required for language learning in general. The task of pronouncing a new language is a challenging one because we need to use our speech organs in unaccustomed ways to make new distinctions between sounds which seem the same to us, to produce sounds which are totally new to us, to produce familiar sounds in unfamiliar sequences, and so on. If you get frustrated when you ask students to repeat a sound or a word and they produce something completely different, maybe just insisting on "repeat after me" is not the best choice. Help students place their tongues in the appropriate place. Ask them to put their hands on their neck to see how the sound Z is different from the sound S. It might take a while, but raising awareness of the physicality of pronunciation can lead to more intelligible speech. Tip number 5. Don't wait for pronunciation lessons. Let's be honest, most of us often struggle to keep up with the syllabus and have to try hard to avoid falling behind, especially if our teaching context requires us to go through a lot of content in a short time. When compared with grammar, vocabulary, reading and listening, which tend to be easier elements to include in tests, pronunciation lessons can sometimes be the first ones we cut from the program. And sometimes the program does not include any pronunciation lesson at all. Every lesson gives you opportunities to tackle pronunciation, and including a bit of pronunciation in every lesson can go a long way when we add up all the lessons in the course. According to Rhonda Snelling, I would also encourage you to include pronunciation whenever you can. It could be a simple on-the-spot verbal error correction of an incorrectly stressed syllable, it could be a dedicated activity to practice pronunciation of the schwa sound, or an activity that encourages students to listen and notice linking sounds. When you teach a word, don't forget to teach and drill the pronunciation. When you teach a grammar item, help students notice which words in the structure receive stress and which ones are weak. And most importantly, make sure you provide feedback on pronunciation, both praising students for their success and correcting their attempts that are not intelligible or can be improved. I hope these ideas help you feel more confident to deal with pronunciation in the classroom. What features of English pronunciation do you usually focus on in your lessons? Are there any techniques to teach pronunciation that you find particularly useful? Let us know in the comments below. And you can also contact me on all social media at whatisELT. Keep learning and keep teaching.